All right, and we're live. Happy Thursday, everyone. I hope you're doing well, whether you're watching this video now live on YouTube or whether you will be watching it later on. I hope you're absolutely fine. And yeah, welcome back into our No Code Ops community show. As you all know, No Code Ops is an international community for operators that use no code, not only to optimize their lives, but also to improve and automate their company's performance. And with this kind of goal in mind, we organize these live events every week, every Thursday at this time, to teach and share a little bit of our knowledge, inviting influential guest speakers from the no-code world into our community to come here and teach you a little bit more about no-code tools and how to best use them for this particular purpose. So without further ado, let's go and meet our guest speaker of today, Nick James, who's an automator based in South Carolina. And he will be showing us a little bit more on how to use Notion and how to go from a static kind of design into a very dynamic Notion page on which you can build on automations and optimize it to its best performance. So let's go ahead and join our speaker. Here we are, still into our gather, and we have a couple guests, a couple people from our community joining the event. Hi Santos, hi Donnie, and of course, hello Nick. Very welcome into our community. So excited to have you here. I was just telling the audience that, you're based in South Carolina, am I right? And you're an automator.
Yep.
And today you will be showing us how to use Notion at its best, performance ever. Do you want to give us a little bit more of an intro on you and like your journey into the no code and what folks are actually going to learn from your talk today?
Yeah, for sure. So my background is I'm an ex-software developer. I worked in like the corporate world for 7+ years. And I used Notion pretty early on and got involved with the ambassador community, which back then was called the Pros community, Notion Pros community, and was doing some localized events when I was based out of North Carolina. And excuse me. And I just got super plugged in with Notion and the community and building kind of workflows in Notion for personally and for business wise, and helping friends and kind of doing those meetups and coming up with creative ways that we could use it. And that kind of evolved into me doing more no code stuff with Notion, and so automation, like using platforms like Zapier and Make and things. With my background in the software dev world, it was obviously interesting to me. And so I started looking more and more into it and started helping and building personal workflows and trying to like find that relationship between the dev world and like the no code world. And so for about the past 6 months, I've been basically doing consulting for no code automation and workflow automation, Notion builds, etc., full time. And have gotten connected into a couple of other communities based off of different no-code tools or just automations in general. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I got here today. Mm-hmm. And as far as what we're going to learn, kind of like from a high level, is just how to basically build the foundation of like a Notion workspace. So it can be developed on top of, be it from an automations perspective, or even just internally, like building out, databases appropriately in different ways. So that way, as your workspace and, productivity kind of system continues to grow, it can be supported by what you've essentially built. So, and if there is any questions, anyone feel free to drop them in the chat or ask the questions. I want to make this as useful as I can for the people that are here first and foremost. So there's not like a specific thing or agenda that I'm going to cover. I'm just going to go off the cuff a little bit. So if you do have questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah, that's awesome. So a little bit like from zero to hero, like people like to say. Which is absolutely amazing, because Notion, I've only started using it recently, like at work, and I've never had a kind of induction on it, from a blank page, what the best practices are, which, I'm really excited to learn about today. So that's great.
Awesome. Are there any questions that anyone has so far before we just jump into it, or?
I have a couple just regarding automations and stuff that people have left. But I think that will make more sense when we start talking about how to integrate Make or other automation tools into Notion. So I'll hold them off.
Sure. Sure. Cool. Then I will. Let's see. I will share my screen. And you guys let me know if you can see this, and if it's too big, just let me know. I can make it smaller.
No, I think it's that was absolutely fine as it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's 1080p, so maybe I'll leave it like that.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess to get started, obviously super basics in Notion. For me, one of the biggest things that drew me to Notion is the fact that it's like keyboard first, right? So all of the / commands and shortcuts that you can use to kind of navigate around the workspace, switching pages or copying links and tags and moving blocks up and down, duplicating, option dragging to duplicate, things like that, is one of the biggest things that really attracted me to Notion to begin with. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a couple of things here. So I like to think of Notion, designing in Notion as kind of as a developer would, with kind of the front end and the back end. Front end being dashboards, back to the databases, the data, and like kind of structure. So oftentimes it doesn't really matter what I'm building. I will tend to start with that structure from the beginning. So let's just say that we're building like a project management system. So we'll have a database for projects, a database for tasks, just to begin with. So the first thing obviously is to create a page, and then you can name this projects and then create a database out of it. So you could create a table, for example, a new database, and then projects, you can think like, okay, obviously they're going to have a name. Some people like to rename this to project, and then tags and the other properties that you're going to add here. Typically in a database, you'll see people will create the created time property and the created by, last edited time, and the last edited by property. And this is typically something that people create and then essentially go in here and hide, because it's more of like a metadata that can be useful when you're filtering data. If you don't create those things from the beginning, it is actually metadata, so you can create them after the fact. But something that I like to do is, rather than doing like what I just did and theoretically removing this property, I like to rename this table just as all, so that there's no filters or anything on it, and then essentially come in here and delete the top properties. Like that didn't take me very long, but what I like to do is when I'm building something, or even like if I'm delivering something to a client, for example, I'll make use of this template button, which is another block type, and I'll just call this new database. And then in here, what I'll do is I'll essentially, rather than creating it again, I will just drag this projects database in here. And then I'll just rename this new database. You can give it an icon if you want to. So that way, when you're creating databases, you can click this button and it'll create that like starting database, which will have this renamed as all. And then when I create a property, it will automatically have these properties in them. I guess something else like you could do is, in this template, essentially, you can modify this. So if you wanted to just have it one example in here and then go in here and I like to go in here and hide these properties as well and set the hide property to always hide. That way they get rolled up in this toggle here. So that way when you create an actual property, the metadata doesn't really get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
So I can go in here and just recreate this again.
So even if it's hidden, it's still somewhere stored in the metadata, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Looks like it's being a little slow. Go ahead and refresh it. Yeah, when you start to scale and you get a database that's got, like 20 properties, this starts to get a little bit overwhelming. So like, let's just say this is projects. So one thing for projects is you'd want status. I'll just keep it default with the status. You can show it as a checkbox if you want it to be like incomplete or complete and kind of a more binary. So just like housekeeping that I always try to do is, make sure that these are in order. So that way when you hide these, whatever properties aren't hidden stay at the top. Something else I like to do is when I'm creating databases or I'm creating items in databases, I like to have a template. So you can do a lot of advanced things with templates, but even just simple things like in the template here, I like to set this to full width because typically I'm going to have a lot of kind of stuff related to whatever the item is. In this case, it's a project in the body of the page, and then change it to small text. And if some people like to change the style here, you could change that style as well. And there's other customizations you can do as well. But typically I like to do that as a template. And then if there's any default properties, like, in this case, when you're creating a new project, it's going to be not started, not necessarily any of the other options, because if you're creating a new project, then it makes sense to have that status be not started. And then I also like to set, in this case, if I'm only going to have like one type of new project, then I will set whatever that template is to the default. That way, every time I create a new project, in this case, it'll have that default.
Mm-hmm.
I also set an icon. I'll just pick one for an example. And another thing too is like now when I create a new project, this will basically inherit defaults that I set. So when I open this up, it's full width, it's small text, it inherits the icon. But this old project that I have here as well, as long as there's nothing on the page, so if I had something on the page, it won't show this. But if you delete this, it will always give you an option to select a template. So even after the fact, if I set this to in progress and then I created a new project, it will not override this change that I made, but it'll apply, the other changes like the icon and stuff.
That's
in the
cool.
template, if I created something in the body.
How did you turn this into a template again?
On to the right of the new button here, you click the drop down and you can click new template.
That's it, right?
And then to edit it, you can come in here and click on the 3 dots to the right and set as default, and edit here as well.
Mm-hmm.
A newer feature that Notion's released as well is repeating. So for projects, maybe not, depending on the use case, but probably more if you have a tasks database, you could come in here and say, I want this to repeat every day.
Right.
And so that task will then repeat.
And I think I got the email today about Notion AI, so I wonder what do you think about that?
Yeah, I've unfortunately haven't been able to play around with it too much because since they're in an alpha, they're fixing some of the bugs before they keep onboarding users. Being part of the Notion ambassadors community, there's a lot of people in there that are giving feedback and stuff as well. All the use cases that I've seen, I think at this point it's no one's like really doing anything serious or crazy. just because it's so new.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, from the like kind of test cases and examples I've seen with people saying like write a blog post, some social media content, or I've seen people do like poems and haikus, Notion songs, things like that. It's all been like really, really fun and really accurate in my opinion. And I think that one of the cool things about Notion and as a company is a lot of the engineer teams or engineers and individuals, they've got kind of these like little pet projects that they work on and stuff, whether they're on the roadmap or not sometimes.
They just get released.
And yeah, they do like a little beta testing and get some feedback on it and kind of like see, is this something that would be super helpful to the community? And so being a Notion ambassador, it's cool to be able to kind of be on the insides and take a peek behind the curtains sometimes on what features are being developed and be able to test them early on. But yeah, I feel like writing content in Notion and like natively writing content in Notion, not just like importing stuff in or like migrating stuff in, is a unique experience just because of that keyboard first mentality, as well as the ability to like embed stuff and have things, I feel like, just flow. And when you've got like a body of text, instead of it being a link, it's like a direct link to a page and things like that, like those types of features, I feel like make the native content in Notion really easy to write. And so the AI like component is just going to make that even better.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna like populate too many properties in here. I don't want this to like be me just populating a bunch of properties. Something else that I do like to do as well when you think about this kind of front end back end, typically people will like their databases into like a toggle called backend, or sometimes there'll be a page and it's like databases, and then people will just drag all of their stuff into that page, for example. But once you've got like if it's right here we just have projects and we can add tasks and stuff as well. So but something that I like to do, especially once you get a lot more databases, is like, for example, in projects we only have this one template new project. So you have to keep in mind, like in Notion, everything's a page or everything's like a block, right? So a page is a block type, a embed is a block type, an image is a block type, a heading is a block type. So you think of everything as blocks, kind of like Legos. Everything's building blocks that you can create something out of. And so essentially this template is just a page that exists, right? So it's got a URL. So if I copy this URL here and I go back to my main page here and I paste it, I can basically paste link to page. And so this is now linked to my new project template. So in the traditional way to edit this template, I'd have to go into projects, and then I'd have well, if it's a toggle here, then it's fine. But if you've got like a kind of a bigger work system, you'd have to go find like where's your actual project database and then get to there. Or if like, okay, I'm at new project here, I can click projects in the breadcrumbs and go back to the original database, and then I can click this drop down, and then I can click on the dots, and then I can click on edit, and then I can get to the page. If you've got a section essentially or a toggle that is templates, and then you keep all your templates there, it's a one click to get to your template. So if you're doing like system maintenance or something like that, like we can do the same thing here for tasks. We'll go ahead and just create a new task template, give it an icon just so it stands out. We'll open it up, copy the link, and then just below this we can paste this as well. So now we have one click into the template. So if we wanted to go in and modify something, we can modify it there. If you wanted to update, icons or something, you can come in, update it, go back again using keyboard shortcuts. It makes it very easy to do that. So that's something that people don't, I think, leverage a lot, is like templates are links.
Yeah, I have a
So yeah,
question, I think, from somebody in
that's
the
something. Yeah, go
audience
ahead.
that can possibly link up well to what we're doing. And maybe you're, with this linking, you might have already answered it. So the question is from Ruchika Abi, and she says, is there a way to refer to Notion page properties within the Notion page content?
Yeah, so just to kind of clarify what you're saying is there a way to relate to like this status as a link?
Yeah, I think that's what they meant. Is there a way
Okay.
to refer to Notion page properties? So yeah, maybe the status. Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately there isn't. These like aren't essentially links. I don't really know what the use case is there. Like if you're trying to see a specific status of something in a given, like in a different area, like that's definitely doable using relations and rollups and the new features that have been coming out with the better databases to see certain properties that are interactive on the relation, which I can definitely get into. But yeah, if they're here and they can kind of clarify like what the use case is there, maybe we can figure out something.
Definitely. I'm
But
just going to post in the chat, Ruchika, if you're here. Let us know if that answered your question.
awesome.
All right.
Cool. So in this task, just to carry on, I'm going to just have a status as well. Keep that default. And then I'm going to create a relation. So relation is similar to a lot of other tools, different terminology. Basically, it's relating one item in a database to another, basically relating two databases. So if you have database knowledge, and it's kind of like when you're creating primary keys and you have your secondary keys living in different databases. So I'm going to relate this back to the projects. And once you relate this, you've got a couple of different options here. So related to projects, you can limit this. This is where you can have the one-to-one relationship or the one-to-many relationship and kind of modify this here, as well as show on projects. So what this is meaning is right now we're in the tasks database and we're creating a relation, which is going to relate to the projects database. And if I click on this toggle, then it's essentially going to have a two-way relation. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And something else that is a bit newer is once I click on this projects property here, I can show this property as a different type. So in here, if I click show at, go on to under show as, if I do, it's going to look like this. And if I add a project, for example, it will show the project here. Whereas if I show this as minimal, it will just show one project. And if I click on this, it'll give me this modal drop down to show me which is linked. So those are kind of the two different options here. So I'm just going to go back and undo this. And then I'm going to, let's see, I can add the task here, or the status rather. So this is what I was saying with the, back to that question, showing a status. So if you, for example, wanted to see like what is the status of the project for this task on the task page, you can't get a link to it. But when you have this relation here, you can show certain properties, which is what's happening here. So task, it would show what tasks this project's related to. And then this is the status. So if I go to the project and I change this project to in progress here, and I go back to the task and I look at the project, you can see now that the new project, which is the project that this task's related to, shows in progress. Whereas, this other example project has the status of not started. So that's the way that you can essentially show a property in a different place without like using like you can't get the link to the property, but this is a way you can show that property in a different area rather than like just going to item itself and seeing what the field is. So see, maybe that answers their question.
I'm sure it does.
Cool. And so this one, I'm going to just do a page section to show you that. Again, you can change the properties here. So if we wanted the status of the task to show here, you could see that now it shows not started. So this is helpful if we've had like example task 2, example task 3, and some of these were, in progress and some of them were done. The fact that you can also click here on this and modify it is something that's newer as well. Previously we had this, but we had to like go here, open the page, click on this, change this, and then go back. But now you can interact directly with these other properties directly from the project page, which is super helpful when you build your databases like this and your database templates, because when you set this as a template standard, and then this is essentially what it looks like here. If you've got, you don't want to do this if you have 100 tasks to a project, but if you only have a couple of tasks to the project, you can easily see here like what's been completed and what hasn't. And then kind of evolving with this, once you get to the point where you've got more tasks, more properties, etc., that's when you start bringing in linked views to databases. So here, this is a linked view. You basically create your, select your source, which I'm going to not create the projects, but I'm going to create a linked view to the tasks database. And again, it's just some housekeeping. I like to always hide the title here, and then I like to rename this to tasks. Sometimes maybe all tasks, depending on where this link. And this is where some magic can come in. So this is showing all of the tasks, task 2, 3, and example task. Just label this 1. So this is showing all the tasks, but we don't necessarily want to do that if all the tasks aren't related to this project. So for example, if we just remove task 2 here, so really task 1 and task 3 are the only 2 tasks that are related to new project. And so we want this to filter, and we want this to filter by the project being new project. So now it's only showing example task 1 and task 3. And to take that a step further, rather than having to go into every project and do this, what we can do is we can actually go into the template here and modify this, and then add that linked view of the tasks database. Hide this and filter the projects. And here what we're going to do is we're going to select new project, which is actually the template. So it's a self-relating filter. And so what that means is now every single time I create a new project and I call this Nick's project, for example, this filter automatically changes to Nick's project. And so by doing these types of setups in your database and building your backend essentially out to have these related properties, and you can get into rollups and stuff as well. By building this out and having like these templates and the links to templates here, the database buttons and the self-relating filters, you really start to build out a scalable system to where when you're managing a lot of projects or you're managing a lot of tasks, for example, it becomes very easy to duplicate and scale. Another thing that I've seen and done a lot is when people have like, we have this new database repeating feature to be able to repeat these items. But something else that you see a lot is when there's a standard set of tasks, for example, in a project, what people will do is they will take the standard set of, so let's say in Nick's project, I have no tasks in here, but let's say that we wanted to, for example, have a standard set of like 2 tasks in every single project. Well, one, you can in here you can drag the tasks out. So let's just say it's task 1, and I'm going to show you this too. So notice that this task 3, the status is done. So if I drag this out as well, and then let me just go ahead and delete this. So now when I create another new project, and we'll just call this project 2, you'll see that these tasks are here. So I can drag. Why did that not?
I love a little bit of troubleshooting in our lives.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. I don't know why that just happened. Okay, so Nick's project 2, then I can drag these in here. And again, if I go to, you can see here, or if I click into task 3 here, you can see that it maintained the status of done. So if you've got, let's say, a database and you have a property which is for like a person, so to say like, oh, okay, Nick's always responsible for this task. Any of this metadata that you have in this task, when you drag this out, this metadata, that's a link. There's no metadata in here. But as soon as I drag this item back into the database here, you can see that it maintains this metadata. So that's a way for you to kind of build out like template structure, or even like people build out a like select your service type of thing. So in a project, let's say that you've got a couple of different project types. Well, obviously you can create different templates, but let's say that you wanted to like create a sub template. Essentially, you could create a template button like this. That's a sub template. And then you could basically duplicate that task into your sub template here and save that. So that way, let's say we don't have any of these tasks in here, and it's a new project you just created, and you want to, basically populate it. And let's say that you have 2 of these, for example. One is a subtemplate and subtemplate 2 or something like this. And you can just click on the template button. It'll create whatever the tasks you've put in it. You can drag that in. And again, if I open this up, you can see that it has a status of done. So it's a way for you to kind of like automate within Notion without having to use another tool like, Make or Zapier or something like that, by being able to create these database templates and template buttons. Another thing which hasn't been as reliable because they've changed, Notion has inevitably changed the way that it works, is synced blocks. So if just kind of like a quick 101, if you're not familiar with what a sync block is, this is essentially the original block that I just created here, outlined in the red. And you can see that denoted here by editing original. And if I copy link to this block and I go somewhere else, so I'll just go all the way back to the homepage, and then I just paste it, it'll give me this modal here, and I'll select paste and sync. So you can see that I've got the red outline here, and it's got the same text in their original block. But notice it says editing in one other page. So if I open this up, now I can see the original block that I originally created was on this page, and then on Nick's project 2 page. And then on the current page, which is denoted by this page, is no code ops. And that's the title of this page here.
Yeah.
And so now essentially this is like a portal between this section of this page and the other section of the other page. So if I updated this and I added another line,
It's like a dependency. It's like a child.
yeah, well, not necessarily a child because it's a clone.
All right.
So if I go back to this other page, this will always be updated with the same.
Okay.
So I can obviously copy and sync, or I could unsync all, which would essentially unsync the block from the other blocks.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of functionality that I just showed hasn't changed. But what has changed is once you create or move this synced block into a template. So like this is a new project template. If I move this into this template here, this kind of the way that this works has changed. So originally, if I created a synced block like this in a template, and again, this is not the original here. This is in this page. The original is here. What I could do and what people use this for is instead of me editing, let's say, across my new project template and across my new task template, I had the same like blurb of about selling templates. You could say you have the same blurb of if you have any questions, please contact me or reach out to me at this number or whatever. And let's say that number was changing for whatever reason, you could have that be a, or maybe it was version as well. Like you wanted to update the version of your template across all the pages. If you have the original block outside or of the template and you modify it, the way that used to work is every single time I would create like a new template from, or rather a new item from a template, it would just inherit and then unsync. But now that kind of that unsync feature of like the relation has broken. So what it will do is I'll always relate back to the original block. So I don't know if that makes sense, but the original, if you put an original synced block in a template and then you duplicate the template, or you create a child of that template, it would essentially create a block, and that's what it does today. Whereas originally it would just create like a synced block back to that original, so you'd only ever have one original. And so that's changed, which is kind of broken some people's flows and stuff. But
Yeah,
anyways.
how would they fix that? I can imagine like having all these templates with all these blocks and all of a sudden they're all unsynced.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't really think there is a way to fix it. I mean, there are the other ways to achieve that. But yeah, it definitely is like a lot of refactoring. So that for us was like, okay, is this, in our ambassadors community, like, is this a bug or is this like by design? And a lot of the times, decisions are sometimes seem to be like that are disruptive like that. I think sometimes seem to be random or like not really like why would this change, because it's not like or like breaks a bunch of use cases for me. And I think a lot of times those decisions are made because like there's other things coming down like in the roadmap coming down the pipeline that we can't see, and in order for those things to work and happen, like some other changes have to happen. So yeah, it's unfortunate if that is the case. You have to go back and kind of refactor everything that's in there. So.
And Nick, obviously you're an ambassador, you're very passionate about Notion, so I just wanted to ask you this question by one of our members here. So this question is from Tony Mitzner. Notion as your go-to, what makes it so special for you? Did you try more recent tools like AnyType or SmartSuite? Or SmartSuite?
Yeah, so those two specifically mentioned, I haven't. For me, Notion was like so I guess to kind of backtrack on how I arrived there. So I was big into like the bullet journaling and like creating your own system. I've always been like super into productivity and like figuring out like how can I optimize my time. For me, my schedule and life is kind of crazy. So for me, it was like I wanted tools and I wanted systems that were going to be flexible enough, but structured enough that as my schedule and life and things adapt and change, like they could adapt with me, rather than me saying like, here's a system, and it's like, here's the box, don't go outside the box, I have to conform to that. And like that works for some people, like going along with like, a specific productivity method or a specific setup in a tool. So when I found Notion, that was like the digital version of a bullet journal for me, and I've stuck with it. I've obviously played with other tools. To me, the way I look at kind of Notion in relation to code tools is, even from a consulting and freelancing perspective, a lot of times people will come and say like, hey, I have a problem, or I have this thing I want to build, and I want to build it in Notion, can you help me? And I'm a very firm believer of like, just because you think that this is the best tool is not always the case. And so there's been plenty of times where I've said, like, have you explored using Airtable, or have you explored using this other tool? And I think that some projects don't even need Notion, and it kind of depends on like what the scope is and what you're building. So obviously I'm, super passionate and integrated with Notion and the community and the team. But the way I look at Notion really is, Notion is like your centralized like OS in your workplace. So if people are doing a lot of data and like you need portals, maybe you're building something in Retool to have able to use a system, but all that data could maybe go to Airtable, or maybe go to Notion databases. Maybe you have Airtable having a bunch of bases and a bunch of data in there, and you build dashboards on top of it, maybe using Softer, or you build like a Glide app or something like that, and you've got these different systems. But for me, the way I look at Notion is like it's the centralized box. So a typical setup and flow is like a business, or you're a solopreneur or a freelancer or whatever. And so you've got other tools, like you're using Stripe, you're using Slack, you're using SavvyCal or Calendly, you're using obviously email. And so when I look at Notion, I think about it as like this centralized box. And so it's like, you have a new client coming in, they go to your website, maybe that's hosted on Notion, maybe it's not. They sign up, and using automation, you have basically their contact information go into your CRM. And I've also done work where there's two CRMs, right? So there's CRM in Notion, there's a CRM in some tool that they use specific to their industry. And those things basically were creating like a two-way sync of automation in there. And so by having Notion be that centralized box, you're not going to create invoices within Notion and then send that for payment, but you can have a database of invoices in Notion. And then when you create that invoice in Notion and you click a certain box to say it's ready to send, that can trigger automation to then create the invoice in Stripe with all of the properties that you've built in Notion. So Notion becomes like the place to work. And I think a big thing for individuals that are into productivity is like, how long, even if I'm going between Notion and Slack and Zoom, how much friction is there to go between those tools? And so once you start having more tools that do similar things, time that it takes to switch and like the context switching between this tool and trying to find it somewhere else, you start to spend more time doing that. Whereas in Notion, if you're building out that OS and you've got multiple databases in here, and one database is related to another, even if the data lives in Stripe because it's invoices, as long as you have that automation hooking back into your Notion database, then you can see, the data that you need in Notion. And you can also have a URL property, so you can just click on it and it'll basically, kick you off to Stripe to look at the invoice itself. And then obviously you go back and you're back into Notion. So I look at Notion as being that centralized kind of box where everything kind of comes in or goes out. And then once you're done with whatever that link or that URL is out, you come back to Notion. And so that's why I think like projects and tasks, like that kind of project management, is always, best housed in Notion, because essentially this is, there's also been times where people have gone and used like Asana or used Jira or something like that from an engineering standpoint. But, and there are tools in those other productivity suites, but, some upper management doesn't want to see all of the Jira user stories and stuff. They just want to see like what's the high level status of projects. And that's where, pulling that back into Notion, where they're creating, articles and things like that, really becomes beneficial. So very long answer to your question, but hopefully it answered it.
And talking about automations, right? We have a question from Dino. And he says, based on what do you select the most appropriate tools? So, for example, Zapier or Make for automations in Notion.
Yeah. So the kind of black and white to that is Make doesn't, or sorry, rather, Zapier doesn't have Notion doesn't have webhooks yet, and so Zapier isn't constantly pulling Make or pulling Notion for updates, be it modifications or new items in a database created. So if that is a use case, I know a lot of people use automate.io for that previously, but Zapier does not support that. So like black and white, if that's a use case for you that you need, then Zapier is not going to be able to do that for you. So I would recommend Make. There are other tools like N8N and Parabola and some others out there. I personally just have found Make to be the best tool for me. I think Make is a little bit more developer-y, and it's not as like cut and simple, if you will, as some other tools. But I personally don't look at that as like daunting or a con. I look at it more as a pro because you can add in like error handling and get more like logs and error and like information and details out of like why things don't work rather than just it saying like there's an error and not giving you information on it. So I feel like more complex workflows are easier to build in Make. There are some tools that I think Zapier is kind of like a golden standard. So a lot of newer tools that start working on APIs and integrations and things like that kind of push towards Zapier before anything else. But yeah, from a developer, ex-developer, or current developer point of view, I would always recommend Make over Zapier for that reason, and it's a lot cheaper. I don't think anyone out there would disagree that Zapier is a bit expensive for what you get. So
a bit pricey, yeah. And did you have something you wanted to show us, particularly using Make? I know you had a section on automations in your talk. There you go.
Yeah, I didn't know if
Yeah.
anyone really had that they really wanted to look at. I've done like some content around like building syncs and stuff from forms or Google Calendar sync to Notion and stuff. So I was just thinking I would, now that I've got kind of this project and task set up, thinking I could do like a basic, kind of intro into to how to connect them.
I do have a question on a specific automation that somebody asked.
Sure.
Somebody called Dimitri is asking, what's the best way to add email automations to a Notion leads database?
Okay. Don't know if Dimitri's here, but I kind of take that as maybe there's two different things there. So assuming that they're saying once I get a lead and I put their contact into Notion, how can I send them an email?
Yeah.
Or if I get an email, how can I add their contact information to Notion? So yeah, if I'll just quickly create here another database. I'll title this one contacts and create some basic fields here for phone number. Really, we only need email. So we got the email in here. So in order to get this started, what you'll have to do is you'll have to add a connection. And so if you go to developers.notion.com and you're logged in with your account, you should, if you're not, it'll say log in. If you are, you'll see view my integrations here. You click on that, it'll show you different integrations. So let me see, I'm logged in with this email. Okay, so I'm just gonna select this integration and I'm going to show this, copy this. So this is your internal integration token. Down here, there's some other settings and stuff. But when you create a new integration, if you don't have one here and you create new, I guess I could do that as well. No code ops. Leave all this. Make sure your workspace is the right workspace. You can add a logo and change these if you need to, like this specific capability. If not, just click submit and then copy this token here. And so now if I go back to Notion and I go to what you want to do is add it to like the top level page. So if you've got like all these databases, rather than adding it to all of these, you can go to, like in this case, no code's ops page, and then click on the three dots in the top right, go down to connections, and then you should be able to find what the heck. We're just going to add this one. The other one's not showing up. So once you have had the connection added, you'll see here, if I go down to projects and go down to connections, you'll see that it's there. So it will inherit down. So yeah, once you've got that added to in Notion, then you can go to make. And so if you're not familiar with make, basically every zap in Zapier is in make is a scenario, and an action in Zapier is an operation in make. So if I click create new scenario, which is similar to a zap, then I have to set a trigger. So I'll just type Notion. I'm going to watch database items, and then it'll ask me like, okay, I need to select so I'm going to add a new connection here. I'm going to say it's a Notion internal, and this is my, and then this is where you're going to paste this token. So I'm not using that one. I'm going to use this one. Paste that in there, and then it'll basically make sure you can authenticate. You can search your database. So in this case, we're going to do contacts. Let me make sure. Code Studio.
Maybe it's missing the database.
Yeah, it should be able to find.
Oh, Santos is saying click on search first. Santos, feel free to jump on your mic if you want, if you have a solution for this.
Yeah, I'm ready. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Hi.
I used to have that in Make as well. Like you have to click on search first, let it load all the databases in Make. There's a problem with Make.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try that.
That's how
I'll also
I
try
experienced
to
it.
see if this works. I just put the ID in there. I copied the ID from the Notion database and added it in there. So I'm just going to do all, so that way it comes in. And then, okay, so let's just say that we wanted, I don't want to go in and like connect all the email, but there's an email option here in Make, and there's also a like Gmail or Outlook. So Gmail here, Outlook, Microsoft 365 email. So you could do those, but since we are like running out of time, I'm just going to kind of show you an example. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to compose a string, and this is going to be sender to at example. And then for the two, this is going to come from Notion, and the subject could be hello, body. This is a test message.
So you kind of HTML the email.
Yeah, it would be HTML setup. You can go in and do breaks and hyperlinks and things like that. So before you hook up the who you're sending this to, if you see here, you've got this properties array, but there should be a properties value array, but it doesn't know what the values look like. So I'm just going to right click on the Notion module here and click run. It looks like it didn't take that ID. Click on search, you said, and just click OK.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
and then, yeah, it pulls in.
That's a really good tip. Thank you. What's your name? Because is it Santos?
My name is Christine.
Oh, that's what I thought.
On the Discord, on the Discord, I'm also Santos number 22. That's why I gave it the same name here.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. That's I'm sure that's going to be helpful for many people out there.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So yeah, you can see now that there's this properties value. So if I go into the two here, you can see properties values here. So basically the email, nick@igeekplay.com is the email property that we want. So now if I, save this, that's fine. So yeah, save this. Then if I go back to Notion here and I just created John Smith.com. And if this was actually running, you would turn this on here and you would set the scheduling to be every 15 minutes or an hour or whatever you wanted it to be, maybe once a day. But I'm just going to click run. And so this will come in. It'll see, okay, I have a new item here. If I open this up, here's the URL back to the item John Smith. When you look at properties, you see here under name, plain text is John Smith, and here's the email. And so this would be, again, send this if it was an email module, but it's not. So anyways, yeah, this is where you can see it pulled the email in. So this is one way that you could set this up. So if you wanted to add people to a specific database, like think about like newsletter. If you added to like create your own newsletter kind of system and not use like ConvertKit or something else, you could build this out and make and say, anytime I add someone to a database, I want them to receive a welcome email. And then once they've received the welcome email, basically once a week, once a month, I'm going to basically fetch the list of people in this database and I'm going to send this newsletter to all of the people there. And then you could also like do different things with webhooks to say, if they click unsubscribe, it's, sends essentially an API call, and that API call will trigger something in Make to remove them from the list and things. So you could really build, kind of the imagination is kind of the end of the road. So if you can think about it, how to design it, you can really build it. So
perfect. All right. Well, because we only have a couple minutes left, I want to open up to the community here. Just wondering if anyone here has any questions to ask to Nick. I can see Mark, Santos, or Christine, John. If you guys have any questions, now it's your time. Oh, Mark has got his hand up. Love that. Go on, Mark.
Thanks, Claudia. Question for Nick regarding recurring tasks. What's your favorite flavor of recurring tasks? How do you get it done? Apologies if you already addressed it, but I know that's a common one.
Yeah, so I think it kind of depends on what what the level of detail is. I think that the simplest way is just to use formulas and say, if I have a property that is last completed on, have a formula which essentially tells you and you manually do it. You can also do that with automation to say if recurring is daily, then once this is marked as done, then trigger it to set it as not started and change the date. But I don't know if you've played around with the repeating feature yet, but that is probably going to replace all of those custom integrations unless you need like something that's kind of a lot more advanced, just to have a new task. One feature or one feedback I've heard with that a lot actually though is some people don't want like a new task. Like think of it as if it's a daily task, people don't want the new task to get duplicated like essentially in a year 365 times. because they want to have like that specific task be, essentially one task and then just change the date, for example. So in that case, yeah, I would just go back to creating a make integration to say, if this task is, set as recurring as not once, then, duplicate or change the date to be the appropriate frequency.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. And last but not least, like if you're thinking of operations and operators, what would be the best advice you would give them when using Notion, and what for?
Just to kind of clarify, operations like from a business standpoint?
Yes,
or
like a biz ops, or sales ops. Like, is there like one great solutions you have in mind for operators, for example, or something that could really help them speed up their performance or their company's performance as well?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like any operations within a company, it's about friction, right? Is minimizing the amount of friction in the team, and I think with friction is also like culture. So fostering the culture of using the tool will obviously eliminate a lot of the friction as well. So I would say when you're designing this, OS essentially, do it with purpose. Like make sure that everything that you create, be it a property, a relation, the database, look for ways and opportunities that you can create a global or master database and filter that out. And use reusable components, things like that, because by doing those and keeping those design kind of processes and methods in mind when you're doing that operational design, it's going to minimize the amount of friction and thus foster a better culture for people to want to use the tool and not to look at it as I'm spending more time on creating this thing rather than just doing my work. And so I think those two things, if you can keep that kind of operational design of reusing components and building foundational structures that can be kind of reused and adapted and built on. And the other thing, you just start small, build something that does exactly what your one use case is. And then as you come up with other use cases and you need it, build it. I think a lot of times people like buy templates or like build an entire OS system out and they don't need all of the features. And thus it creates a bunch of time waste and tech debt. And then you end up like refactoring the way things are built anyways. So kind of start small, be agile, quickly pivot, use reusable objects and stuff, which it makes it a lot easier to build and refactor.
Mm-hmm. That's a great tip. Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like start small, automate, scale up, and and improve and build on that. Well, thank you so much, Nick, for being here with us today. I do hope that you stick around in our community as well. I know you must be like super busy with your ambassador role at Notion, but we also have a lot of operators in our community that need support using that tool. So it's been incredible to have you here with us today, and I appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone else does as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if there's anything that anyone wants to discuss, feel free to hit me up in the community or DM me on Twitter. Or if there's any other questions that we didn't have time to get to today or specific use cases, you can do that as well.
Awesome. And I just shared your Twitter handle in the chat as well for people.
Thank you.
Awesome. And I followed you because I don't know why I wasn't. So now I do.
Awesome. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nick. And yeah, I'll see you around, and I'll see everyone else here at our community at No Code Ops.
Awesome.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.